My Scott story is more of a Galin story, or a Goldenberg story, or a Kurzner story, or a Goldberg story. They're all intertwined. Didn't matter who they were, the last name was irrelevant. But the favorite is the Sunday morning, get locked in the car with Scott as his father went shopping at Zabar's on Broadway on Sunday morning, thinking that was what normal children do. We would just get locked in the Cadillac and sit in traffic while Scott's father would go shopping for Nova for an hour or two, and we'd sit there in the car. It's a very normal way to bring up your children.
Uncle Scotty, as we know him as our family, we've been tennis partners for many, many years, and I think that's probably the thing we've done most together, as well as spending many vacations together, as you know, in Connecticut with the families. But tennis has been our primary sports activity, but we've just spent countless times around the table, visiting and talking and sharing times together with our families.
Scott and I have done so many things together through our life. We've traveled through Europe, we've backpacked through England, France, Switzerland. We spent a summer away at Orm, which is a horseback riding camp in Arizona, when we were both 15 years old. When he was at Emory and I was at Tulane, I would visit him on the way down to New Orleans, and I would visit him on the way home from New Orleans, so always wanted to maintain that connection with Scott even through college. Whitewater rafting down the Colorado River. Most recently, for Alan's 50th birthday, we just got back from Montana, where we went whitewater rafting again, horseback riding, skeet shooting, had a really fun time. And to think that Scott's been in my life for 40 years is a pretty incredible concept, that we've known each other for that long and have been as close for so many years. Without question, we are as close today as we were growing up.
One of my favorite Scott stories is going bike riding with him in Boston with one of my bike riding partners, and he decided he was going to take us to Harvard Square on early Sunday morning. And to get there, not only did we bike ride from Lexington down to Harvard Square, but he took us down Memorial Drive, which is one of the FDR drives of Boston, at 8 a.m. And the spectacular thing about it was that there was practically no one on the road, so it really didn't matter. But if I had known we were going to bike that way, I probably would have had some second thoughts, and we did it effortlessly.
Thanksgivings together, Jewish holidays, long weekends, but again, I think Uncle Scott to us has been always just a wonderfully kind and gracious person, and uniquely interested in the lives, my own life personally, as well as the lives of the four boys, and continues to be an important part of the boys' lives. I know that they each have independent relationships with him, which is something that Liza and I treasure very much. And I know that they often reach out to him for advice, and he is quick to respond. And that's something that is very special to Liza and myself.
We went out in 8th grade for a little while. I remember actually coming to his apartment. I guess it must have been during a summer or late spring or something, and we went up to the pool and went for a swim.
When we were in Southbury by the pool, I was doing something bad, like I usually did when I was 5, and Scott was yelling at me, but I thought I was the only one that, I didn't know what was happening, because I was beating up Lucas, and Scott was yelling at me, but I didn't know why he was yelling at me, and I remember I've never seen him get that mad. He was just so mad at me, because I didn't listen to him, I didn't come inside and sit down, and his veins were popping out, and he said, "Get inside now!" And I started crying, and that's my memory of Scott.
I have these distinct memories of Southbury, Scott. I remember when you and my dad would play tennis, and I would run out there with the cold the cold cups of water with ice in it, and give it to you and my dad. I remember you guys sort of shooed me away or got mad when I interrupted your intense tennis games. But I sort of, out of all the things in Southbury, the pool, I always have this memory of you two hitting the ball back and forth and me sort of watching, jealous that I can't play. The one sport I can't actually play is tennis.
Would go swimming in the pool at Southbury which I like to stay in the pool all day long. I was kind of like a fish. Every time that Daddy would come into the pool, we had this little thing where, I think it started when I was like a baby, where we would splash each other in the face and then go, "You splashed me!" And we still do that today.
We always teased each other about where we each lived, because he lived all the way on the east side and I lived on the west side, and it always seemed like he needed protection to come to the west side. So I used to tease him to make sure he had his had something to protect him before he ventured over to the west side. So we would just kind of tease each other and banter back and forth. I remember doing that a lot in high school, and then we just continued our friendship.
I remember his bar mitzvah at Park Avenue Synagogue with Cantor David Putterman. Longest bar mitzvah I ever went to.
Another interest that we have is flights of beer or wine. So whenever we go out, if there's a place that will pour us light to dark beer or light to dark wine, I guess that would be white to red, and there's some level of tasting and perhaps a little paper describing the different wine and beer, then that's for Scott and I. We love that.
When he was little, I used to put Scott outside in a playpen in our driveway in Woodmere, where very often he used to undress himself, including taking off his snowsuit. And the mailman used to ring my bell to tell me my son had no clothes on.
Just our general interest in running that we share, and the fact that we've gone on many, many runs together in Southbury, in Lexington, in the Long Island, New Jersey. We've covered some territory, and it's always one of my favorite things to do with Scott, because it's a great time to bond with each other and share stories and catch up, usually, because we haven't seen each other in a while. And I do remember running with Scott when my parents had a house in Southampton, and Scott asking me my opinion about asking Jody to marry him. And I remember feeling so honored that he valued my opinion, but then I was thinking, I don't know what to say. So I can't remember what I told him, but I guess they ended up marrying each other, so I must have said the right thing. And then, of course, our infamous run in Southbury, when we went a little too far and got lost, because unfortunately one genetic trait that we do share is our incredibly bad sense of direction. And so we went on a really long run and then realized we didn't know where we were, and then had to figure out where we were and get back. So I think we were gone for a really long time, and everybody was worried. But it was our little adventure, and now we're a little more careful. So I hope that we can share many more runs together, even though I've gotten much slower, and he seems to still be gallivanting past me, so I hope it keeps up.
I remember a summer that we worked for my uncle, who was a home builder out in New Jersey. I would come by, pick Scott up at about 6:30 in the morning. We would drive out to Ringwood, New Jersey, spend hours and hours and hours building homes, sweeping homes, working on the roof, working on the basement, doing whatever they needed us to do. And then we would end up sleeping in the model house probably once or twice a week, just so we would be able to sleep a little bit later and be there first thing in the morning.
I was a very neglectful mother. Scott was playing in the park and came upstairs crying that he had hurt himself playing ball. His knee was all skinned, and I was so busy taking care of his knee, I never looked at the rest of him. The next day when his father came home, he saw him playing ball and asked him why he was holding the bat in such a funny position. He said his arm hurt. P.S. he had a broken arm.
I think as I've grown up, you've really been sort of a large part of my life, You've been a mentor to me. I've called you probably 100,000 times since I was 10 years old, whether it was when I started my company, what college to go to. But I think what's been very meaningful to me is when I've been upset or happy, you sort of have been there for me, regardless of whatever was going on in my life. And I definitely wanted to let you know how much I appreciate it. Even graduating college, looking for a job, not only have you been helpful, but you've been encouraging, and you've been thoughtful, and I've been able to sort of bounce any ideas I've ever wanted to off of you, and I do really appreciate that.
As I left the École Française after the 3rd grade to attend Dalton, guess who followed a year later? You. We became inseparable, from riding bikes to school, to Manassas, to sometimes walking. After school sports, flipping baseball cards, and Mrs. G's snacks. We were a team. How about the fact that we always beat Ken and Jeff at tennis? Gracie football, you and I used our heads to outmaneuver a guy that was nearly 6'4", and another guy that was playing varsity football. We even teamed up academically. Without you, I would never have done well in Mrs. Zeck's class. Trigonometry. You and I plowed through the book until late at night.
We rented Guys and Dolls, and we watched that movie, and I really liked it because I'm a big musical theater person. And then Daddy was away on a business trip, and when he called to say goodnight, he said, "Hi, how are you? How was your day?" And instead of saying, "Good, how are you?" I answered, "Nicely, nicely." And he still does that on the phone today.
Well, supposedly, even though I don't recall this, I gave Scott a roller skate to play with when he was sitting in his crib bored, thinking that would be a good toy, but of course I didn't hand it to him. I lobbed it at him and it hit him somewhere. I thought I hit him in the head, but my mother said it wasn't so bad. But of course roller skates in those days were heavy metal, they weighed like 10 pounds each, so I probably could have really hurt him. But luckily he survived.
I remember in 8th grade, Scott was always on the edge of being with the cool kids and being with Alan and Jeffrey and myself, but he always bordered that cooler kid that I myself never really got into. So there was a party at Ian Fennell's house in 8th grade that Scott was invited to, and I was so bummed out that I wasn't invited. He wanted me to go anyway, and I thought it was weird that I would show up at a party that I wasn't invited to, but he said, "Don't worry about it." And I always thought it was kind of cool that he got invited and I didn't, because again, he kind of circled everybody, and I think I was a little bit more one-dimensional than he was. And he invited me just to show up at Ian's party. I showed up. They were surprised to see me, but it was fine once I got there, and ended up having a great time. And it was Scott who opened those doors, and again, he always was able to have the relationship with a certain clique at school that I probably really wasn't a part of.
I remember one time I was down in Florida and the baseball team was down there, and I drove my brother's car over to watch the team play, watch him and Kenneth and all those guys play.
If my first company I started, Scott, made $50 million, you'd be entitled to $51 million of that. I remember when I first started that company, you literally were on the phone with me all the time. And it's weird. I think my computer knowledge is pretty vast, nothing compared to you, of course. But I think it stemmed from all the problems I had at home with our cable internet, and I do remember sort of always fascinated by your knowledge of computers. I remember growing up and you having these laptops, which were mammoth, now that I think of it, but I thought that was the coolest thing. Oh my God, Scott has this insane little, remember when you had that mini laptop? When you were working out of that small office, it must have been 10 years ago, and you had that first sort of netbook. I was always fascinated by your knowledge of computers as sort of spurred me to enhance mine.